You know the drill, folks. Democracy is on the ballot.
There's something else at stake. Democracy itself.
Donald Trump cannot be president again. He's an existential threat to democracy.
It is democracy itself that will be on the ballot.
Trump and his movement, they are not running against Democrats. They're running against democracy. Yeah. They're running against the democratic process. They want to radically change the kind of system that we have, the government that we have.
Now, to be fair, in theory, if the United States was a democracy, and I'm not saying it's not, but I'm also not convinced that it is. Let's put it this way. In an alleged democracy, every election is important. And given the state of the world right now and the United States' place within the world, this election would be particularly important. Isn't that right, Mr. President?
I'm not sure you're going to understand.
Yeah. But don't worry, folks. This is a democracy, right? And in a democracy, we have choices. You can have a president who's a Democrat or a Republican. Fun fact, the last president who was neither a Democrat or a Republican was Zachary Taylor of the Whig Party in 1848. But I digress. The point is, if the United States of America were really a democracy, we'd have many choices. And while we do have a few more choices than just Republican or Democrat, nobody ever talks about those choices unless they are mocking you for wasting your vote on someone who's never going to win. Yeah, well, they're certainly never going to win if the only way you ever talk about them is as a wasted vote. Personally, I have less and less hope for a political solution, and I'm focusing more on building up my local community, like the amazing homeschool community that we're growing here. Make sure you're following me over on Instagram, where I share more about that on a daily basis. It's at TeachingLiberty, and I also have it linked in the description down below. But I haven't totally given up on a political solution, and I don't think that we can just completely abandon the political arena. Ultimately, a solution will likely be a hybrid of community building and of building a new political coalition that demolishes the divide and conquer tactics of the two-party system. The question is then, have you hit that like button yet? If not, go ahead and hit the like button because it lets YouTube know that more people should see this video, and it lets me know that you like me, which is nice. So thank you. But seriously, like this video, share it with all your friends, and let me know your thoughts in those comments down below. Which brings us to our main event, watching and reacting to a recent conversation between Kim Iversen and Briahna Joy Gray on the best mechanism for breaking the duopoly. So I'm going to start it here, a little less than 14 minutes into the conversation. They've been going on for a bit about the Israel-Palestine issue, and Kim has been arguing that she trusts RFK more on the issue, and Briahna Joy Gray says she trusts none of them. So we're going to pick it up here where Kim is basically dismissing any other third-party candidates, and Briahna Joy Gray is like, why are you just outright dismissing them?
Why is it, why are you framing it between... The choice,
well, because it is. I mean, if it weren't, Jill Stein is my preferred candidate, and I would like everybody to like Jill Stein. The reality of the situation at this point is she's not growing enough in the polls for her to actually be a viable candidate. I mean, many of us can continue talking about her.
Kim, I think that talking like that is precisely the problem. There's this collective fear of failure that's I call it a kind of loser syndrome.
This is exactly the point that I was making. We're only allowed to talk about these other candidates in the context of them not being viable. And of course, by what metrics are we measuring viability? The metrics that were handed by the corporate mainstream media. Most people who I talk to these days are incredibly frustrated with politics as usual, incredibly frustrated with their choices. And yet, there's this idea that we've all been handed down that those are your only choices. Even if there are some other people in the mix, you can't really support them because they're not viable. And if we're ever going to get out of the two-party trap, we have to reject this premise. We have to support the candidate and the party that truly reflects our values, not just rhetorically, not just when it's convenient, but really who reflects our values. And if that's Jill Stein and the Green Party, you should support them. If that's RFK and he was a Democrat, but he's, running as an independent, then support RFK. If that's the Libertarian Party, then support the Libertarian Party. Even if the corporate media tells you they are not viable, they are only not viable because you choose not to support them. And this next point that Briahna is going to make is super important because even at the end of the day, you do end up voting for one of the two mainstream candidates. Don't just give your vote away. Make them work for it. So here, I'll let Briahna go on.
I think it's infinitely more brave and infinitely harder to say that people should vote for the candidate they actually believe in, especially in the shadow of a genocide, than to just say, well, yeah, this guy's polling the most. We can all see that RFK Jr. is polling the most.
Right.
But first of all, he's not going to win either. So why would we telegraph to ostensibly the most left party, the Democratic Party, that what it needs to do is move more toward RFK Jr. as opposed to move more toward our Jill Stein if they want our votes back, if they ever want a chance of winning again, right? I'm not saying that that's why we're voting for Jill Stein or that's the ultimate goal, but to the extent that that might be in effect, isn't that what we want to be telegraphing?
Brianna's exactly right here. We're never going to get anywhere if we just default to one of the two mainstream corporate parties, the Democrats or the Republicans, because they're the only ones who can win. So you have to choose the lesser evil. We have to make these people work for it. I made a video a while ago for Trump supporters with this exact message.
It's a very powerful voting bloc. Why just give it away to him? Why not play some politics? Why not build some leverage, make some demands, try to mix it up a little bit? We're over a year and a half out. Maybe you do ultimately support Trump, but is there something that we can do over the next year and a half to actually flip the system on its head the way that Trump had kind of promised in words, but his actions for sure betrayed that.
Like what we see going on with the Democrats right now, how Biden's out, they swapped in Kamala, and everybody's just like, woo, Kamala, save democracy. If we're ever going to have hope of breaking the duopoly, we have to stop falling into this trap. We have to make the parties work for our votes. We have to be willing to make some deals, to negotiate, to play for influence. Let's keep going.
The point is that, well, Jill Stein's not a Democrat, so she's not going to be listened to by the Democratic Party. Jill Stein's not a Democrat, so they're not going to care about, she's not going to have any influence or she's not going to be able to win. Well, for those reasons, Jill Stein and RFK Jr. are in the same place because RFK Jr. is who he is and has the beliefs that he believes and has been, I don't mean this judgmentally, but courting the audience that he's been courting. The Democratic Party loathes him, is not going to listen to him, and is not going to have any takeaways from his success, other than they already, Kennedy aside, are eager to move right on a number of issues because that's where they think the electorate is. And more importantly, actually, that's where they know their donor base is. So I'm just confused about this. That's not my concern. Like to the extent that there's resistance to the Democratic Party to change, that is true regardless on the basis of the political affiliations of RFK Jr. and Jill Stein, respectively. What I'm more concerned with is the directionality of the influence that they have.
But what did it, I mean, did the Democratic Party change at all after Bernie? I mean, was there any,
there were changes to the platform for sure.
So let me give you an example of the Libertarian Party doing exactly what Briahna Joy Gray is talking about. Using their influence to not necessarily win the election, but to influence the parties to move more in their direction, to work for their votes, to include them in their administration, to have them be part of the conversation and have a seat at the table. Because at the end of the day, that is what it's about. Maybe it's not as satisfying as completely smashing the duopoly of ending the Democratic Party, of making the Republican Party a thing of history and replacing them with many parties that truly represent and reflect people's values. But this is politics. It's not a winners take all game, even though sometimes we treat it like that. It is about influence. And let's look at some of the things that the Libertarian Party is doing to have a major influence on this election. I went to the Libertarian National Convention had never been before, but I was going to be just outside of DC on this particular weekend, and I found out it was the same weekend as the convention, so I decided to go through and see what it was about. And boy, did I pick an interesting convention to go to. Chair of the party, Angela McArdle, took a very different tack than leaders of the Libertarian Party in the past. She invited candidates from both of the major parties. At this time, it was Biden. He didn't come, of course. She also invited Trump, who showed up. She also invited Vivek Ramaswamy, who showed up. She also invited Robert Kennedy Jr., who showed up. It was about building bridges. It was about gaining influence. It was about seeing what coalitions could be forged because, yeah, realistically speaking, the Libertarian candidate is not going to win. But if the major parties know that they have to work for our votes, work and move their platform in our direction, or I say ours, but in the direction of the Libertarian Party, that makes a big difference. And so I was there when Trump came to speak, and this was my reaction.
I'm here at the Libertarian National Convention. Trump is getting ready to take the stage. We're filled with libertarians, but there's a good amount of Trump supporters here too. There's some tension, sure, but when our libertarian guys were up there talking that libertarian talk, a lot of these ladies behind me were saying, who is that guy? Because I agree with almost everything he said. And these girls right here, when we were chanting "End the Fed," they took out their phone and looked up what the Federal Reserve is. So I'm not sure what Donald Trump's strategy was coming here, but I definitely know the Libertarian strategy to get more press and to spread our ideas, that this is a good moment for the Liberty movement.
And just a few days after the Libertarian Convention, Angela did a video where she explained this strategy very explicitly.
We are the most powerful voting bloc in the country right now, and we are deciding what happens. This is my perspective, like, let's take votes from Biden so we can free Ross Ulbricht. Because right now we have a lot of political power, and it's amazing. We are going to decide the fate of the next election. And I have had conversations with Donald Trump, more than one, face to face at this point. Angela, how could you betray us? I'm not, man. I am advancing libertarianism. I am supporting our party. I'm telling people to join our party. I'm telling people to vote for our candidates. And I'm doing political wheeling and dealing, which is exactly what I should be doing. Let's get the Department of Education abolished. Let's get a legit libertarian into the cabinet. This is totally within our ability to do. It is. If you don't want to do it, you are snatching defeat from the jaws of victory, because we are here. We are here, and I'm just going to go so hard between now and November. And if you can't stand the heat, just get out of the clown car, get out of the clown car. But I do hope that you would get in this clown car and support Chase Oliver if you're in a blue state, and support the party no matter where you're at, because if you can just withstand a little bit of discomfort or do whatever it is you need to do, like, we're going to get Ross Ulbricht out of prison. And if you can't be just a little bit gay and a little bit woke, and fake it till you make it to get Ross out of prison, like, you don't deserve the credit. So please join my suicide squad. It is a shit-eating suicide mission, and I am 100% here for it. Join the party, help make the Trump campaign better by being a Libertarian Party dues-paying member and sending good feedback to them. If you're in a blue state, support the Chase Oliver campaign. Help us pull votes from the left for Chase Oliver. It's going to be awesome. He's way better than Biden. I don't want to hear it. He's better than Biden. No matter what your feelings are in any other respect, he is literally better than Biden. He's better than Jill Stein and Cornel West too, even though I love those people, but that's because Chase understands government spending is bad.
So you're not playing to win, at least in the short term. You're playing for influence. And then in the long term, that's going to lead to a win. This is a long game. This is a marathon, not a sprint. This isn't about the next election. Of course, as we said in the beginning of the video, every election is important. But if we are really going to save our democracy, technically it's a republic. If we're really going to save the republic, we have to have a long-term vision. But in the short term, that means good strategy. I met another candidate at the Libertarian National Convention, Lars Mapstead. Now, of course, he's not the person who was nominated, but he had a great strategy for making that mark in the short term that could potentially, in the long term, lead to actual wins.
It's called Stop 270. And essentially, if no candidate gets 270 electoral votes, it goes to the House of Representatives under the 12th Amendment, and it's called a contingent election. So it turns out that there's 2 states, Maine and Nebraska, that split their electoral vote. And these states are very achievable. We only have to get 250,000 votes in Omaha, Nebraska, or 250,000 votes in Portland, Maine, to achieve this victory. And we could send it to the House of Representatives and basically shove a giant middle finger to the duopoly on election night. And I believe that this is the best way to get the Libertarian Party the growth that it needs, the finances that it needs, and to let people in America know that we're not libtards because it has the word lib in it, and we're not MAGAs who smoke dope. We're people who want to reduce the government and let you live your life the best way that you see fit without harming other people.
So it's just a few specks of gold on the map now, but I talk to people every day who have no idea that anything other than the Republican and the Democratic Party exists. And if on national TV those golden flakes were there on the map, people would all of a sudden start to ask questions about this Libertarian Party. And over time, it could build into a real coalition that not just has influence on the 2 major parties, but actually is a viable party that can win national elections. All right, let's get back to the convo between Kim and Briahna.
To be clear, I want to build a third party. That's why another reason why I think it's so much more important to support Jill Stein, or even Jill Stein over Cornel West, who I respect so greatly, because my interest is not in the candidate, but in actually building a party structure, getting them, $20 million of federal funding that they can get if they hit 5% of the vote, by voting for someone who actually stands for what I believe in and can start building a party infrastructure and continue to build a party infrastructure across the country that can elect people all the way down ballot.
I think if your primary concern or goal is a third party, then you'd vote Kennedy. You'd have to. That's the only person who's actually going to break the duopoly. Jill Stein's not going to break that duopoly.
My primary concern isn't voting a third party. I don't want to vote for a genocidal maniac.
No, right. But you want to break a duopoly, right? You want to break the duopoly. Well, the only person who's really got a viable shot at breaking that duopoly at this point is Kennedy. Jill Stein doesn't have that.
He doesn't have a party.
He doesn't. I mean, it doesn't matter.
He doesn't have a party.
You don't have to have a party.
He could build a party later, sure, but he's a Democrat. So in all likelihood, he would just end up going back into the Democratic Party rather than building his own party infrastructure. Perhaps for a time that could moderate the Democratic Party, and that might be a win. But I'm with Briahna here. Long term, if we want to break the duopoly, we have to build a third party, build influence, run candidates. And while they might not be hugely successful in those candidates winning, it's about pushing either the Democratic Party or the Republican Party more to their side, making them cater to that agenda, making them include some of those people in their administrations, making them change some of their policies, moderate some of their policies.
At what point are we going to learn this lesson and
the
stop
Green Party's
investing
not
in these heroic? Why not?
Because it's just too one-sided. I mean, in order to build, it's too far left. I mean, the Green Party is just never going to attract on many issues. Practically all of them. Jill Stein is not, though. Jill Stein as a candidate is actually quite populist.
I agree with Kim here. The Green Party is super far left. They're kind of a one-issue party, very heavily environmentalism. And if it's going to be a party to break it, I don't think it's going to be the Green Party. I think it's much more likely to be a Libertarian Party. And they're going to get into that conversation right now.
Party. The point is, though, that on a very basic level, the Green Party adopts all of the populist frameworks that we say that we care about as people who formally supported Bernie Sanders, right? Really basic bedrock issues like Medicare for all, which 69% of voters of Americans still wanting to have these greater labor protections, wanting the environment not to burn up into a crisp. I mean, it's not like a rocket science issue, right? Like this isn't this isn't a close one in terms of which one of these parties, and I say that, again, understanding that RFK Jr. doesn't have a party, which one of these parties actually represents the interests of most Americans?
The Green Party doesn't. I mean, it would be way more popular if it did. If anything, the Libertarian Party has a better shot at breaking through, in the existing parties that are out there that are already kind of growing and popular. The Libertarian Party has a greater shot at becoming that third party potential. I mean, but they've got their own ideological problems that people are uncomfortable with. The fact that what is the ideology other than no government for anything?
They don't want a government, exactly.
Right.
While it's true in its most pure form, the Libertarian Party would essentially mean getting rid of all government. I would say politically, it actually has a more practical vision of reducing the size of the government and creating more liberty in people's social lives and more liberty in people's economic opportunity. I'm obviously a little bit biased. I have very heavy libertarian leanings. I voted libertarian in the last 3 presidential election cycles. I believe it was Gary Johnson, and then Joe Jorgensen. I attended the Libertarian National Convention this past year where Chase Oliver was chosen as the presidential candidate. I'm most likely going to be voting for him this cycle. It's not because I'm registered as a libertarian. Like I said, I have ideological leanings towards libertarianism, but I'm actually registered as a Democrat. But I do think in terms of party membership, in terms of running candidates and winning elections, in terms of getting some of the actual vote in national presidential elections, the Libertarian Party has proven that they have the most viable infrastructure to do that.
So but that allows a lot of room for a lot of different ideas. That's why you have a Chase Oliver, for example, who's now the nominee for the Libertarian Party. I get it. There's a lot of strife there, but Chase Oliver is somebody who comes from the Democratic side. He's a leftist libertarian, and the libertarians have accepted him. So as the Libertarian Party actually has more room for people to be left and right.
The Libertarian Party, while ideologically you might think that some of the people are a little bit out there or there's no way you can never have any government, they really do make room for people from the left and the right to come together around more moderate political policies.
The Green Party is too authoritarian for populism. The Green Party is not at all populist. There's nothing populist about the Green Party. The Green Party is full-on authoritarian. And that is where Jill Stein and I have had conversations about that authoritarianism, and she differs from the party on those particular points of wanting to control. They're big on, right, in order to solve all the problems that the Green Party cares about, you have to do a lot of massive control of the populations. It's just not popular. That is why the Libertarian Party is growing faster than the Green Party at this point, because people are wanting less government control, less government intervention. And so libertarians have been able to soak up more of the populists than the Green Party has been able to do.
Exactly. And that's the problem with so much of the policy, whether it's on the left or the right. It takes so much control and power of the government to implement. And Briahna, she's a leftist. She wants the government to have a lot of power to intervene in people's lives to make things more fair socially and politically, and doesn't really understand how that comes back and just undermines any fairness that might have been hoped to be achieved.
Of those parties are really going to break the duopoly, because they are viewed as fringe by the vast majority of the voters. So even if people like myself, who I tend to agree a lot with libertarians, but I would never call myself a libertarian because I don't believe in no government. I believe you have to have some rules and regulations in order to make things fair and consistent. I think that if you have no government and no rules, then you do end up with corporations running amok and gaining all the power. And how do you got to do something to correct that.
So there's some big misconceptions here. I think about the Libertarian Party and libertarianism. We already talked about how the party does have a more practical policy program, and it knows that, especially in the short term, it's not just going to eliminate all government. It's about paring down the size of government. But I also want to address this idea that if there was no government, corporations would just become the ruling powers. If you look around at our current circumstances, corporations are the ruling powers. And the way that they're able to grab so much market share and so much political power is by influencing the government, by capturing the agencies and creating this revolving door effect. See, what the corporations do is they capture these agencies, they influence them to create regulations that actually benefit them. They market them as being for the people, as making things more fair, but really they benefit the corporations. We see this in big pharma. We see this with the banks. I mean, in fact, that's why the Fed was created, because the banks didn't want so much competition. The point of this video isn't to defend libertarianism. I do want to talk about the Libertarian Party being a very viable candidate for breaking the duopoly. So let's continue on with that part of the conversation.
We've never seen a libertarian example in the world at all ever working.
Well, we're watching Argentina crash and burn right now under Javier Milei.
Well, maybe it's still too early to tell.
I did a podcast about this earlier. I'm not convinced he's really a libertarian. I think he might have co-opted the label and really just be cover for a corporate takeover. But again, another conversation for another video. Let's keep going here.
Well, we'll see how this 300% inflation goes. But like,
look, for the first time ever, the first time in many years, they just had no inflation increase for the first time. That just happened.
We can agree to disagree, but I just got to say this for the sake of this podcast and my listeners, because I believe that we are creating the world that we want to build.
Yeah.
The Green Party is going to break the duopoly. You have to invest in something and build something if you want it to actually work. And your values actually matter, and you should vote your values. And if everyone collectively who's listening to this podcast voted for the person who they actually thought was going to make their life better, end a genocide, and give them the basic protections that other similarly affluent countries have, who aren't nearly as affluent as the United States of America, you could be living in a better world.
Is it the Green Party? Is it the Libertarian Party? Is it some other party? What is the most viable mechanism for breaking the duopoly? Now, like I said in the beginning of the video, I think that ultimately it's going to be a hybrid solution. We can't just go all in on some third party or on a non-Republican or Democratic candidate. We have to be doing the work locally. We have to be making sure that we ourselves are independent, sovereign beings who can be self-sufficient, who have local communities that we can depend on. That is a big part of what I believe the solution is. We talked about a lot of different strategies to break the duopoly. Of course, we were still thinking about things a lot in terms of this left-right divide. And I think one of the keys to really breaking the duopoly is reframing the conversation. So to do that, you're going to want to watch this video next.
Come on.